Hello, good afternoon, everybody. We are ready to start our monthly webinar on behalf of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the Administration for Community Living, and the Indian Health Service. I would like to welcome everyone to the Long-Term Care Services and Supports webinar series. And I said that wrong, so I'm going to say it again. It's the Long-Term Services and Supports webinar series. My name is Anna Whiting-Sorrell, and I work for Kaufman and Associates. I will be your moderator today. We're excited about our webinar, the title, Nourishment from the Land, Plants, and Foods. As we begin the webinar, I'd like to highlight the main features of your Zoom webinar interface. So you can see the technical notes. So the presentation slides will appear in the main window, while the speaker will appear on the top corner. At the bottom of the screen is your menu bar. Here you will find the chat, raise hand, question and answer, and closed caption functions. Please use the chat box to report any technical issues you may be experiencing. We have people that will be able to respond to these concerns as they come in. Next to the chat box is the raise hand feature. You will be able to use this during the question and answer segment to let us know when you would like to unmute your mic so you can ask a question. Another way for you to submit a question is in the question and answer box, where you can leave your questions at any point during the webinar for the presenter to address during the question and answer segment at the end. Lastly, live captioning is available for today's broadcast. Simply click the CC icon to use this feature. I do want you to be aware that today's webinar is being recorded, and that recording will be made available online in the near future at cms.gov. With that, I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. The next slide is a disclaimer slide. If you want to go back to that, Brandon, please note the webinar series is supported by the contract awarded by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this webinar are those of the presenter and do not necessarily represent the official position or policies of the Department of Health and Human Services or the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. It is my honor to introduce our presenter from First Nations Community Health Source. Dr. Shanoa Ba is from New Mexico. She completed her doctorate in health and cultural communication at the University of New Mexico in the Department of Communication and Journalism. For the past 12 years, she has taught communication courses at the University of New Mexico and other places, including the AIAI Tribal College. She presently serves as the cultural care provider supporting the community with health promotion and wellness groups focusing on Indigenous well-being. Shanoa Ba has worked in public health extensively in community education and clinical settings. Her experience ranged from pediatric to school-based health center, provider training, community health engagement, to school nutrition and wellness programs. As a cultural educator and mother, she advocates for the promotion of Indigenous language, lifeway preservations, intergenerational and youth empowerment. She co-founded the local charter school in Albuquerque called NACA, the Native American Community Academy. She worked together with families to create a wellness model and a curriculum for student and faculty well-being. She advocates for the need of historically marginalized, underserved, and vulnerable populations in both rural and urban settings, focusing on cultural relevancy, inclusion, and equity. Ultimately, Shinoba cultivates the importance of social justice through culturally centered health communication, health promotion, and service learning for youth and communities. So with that, I'm going to send it over to you. And we're so proud and honored to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you to Kaufman and Associates for this wonderful invitation. I'm honored to be here today with each and every one of you that serve our communities and our elders through CMS and our own Indigenous communities, whether they're in urban areas or in our Native Nation homelands. I would like to first introduce myself to you in a traditional manner, as taught by my grandparents and my communities of the Dene Nation. Yad e shik e doshadene, e hehat kwan dasokagi, ado net shlene e ziltlanin shle, e hanagati dot tretnesanhe, ado hashkana zoy dan hik e, ado English dot French bashish chin, ado ashihe e dashanella, dashache, ado English e dashanella kut adia denesanen shle. Bahan sendo ba chéitnín kwan na ni yahigi do kon chilchoni glo kon jonago kwa adij ian nan se azebe yelt get do leil do skojent ian yad ehigi jonago ban si case do leil ko yad e do yaha. I just introduced my kinship with you in a traditional Dene Navajo manner. My mother is of the Mountain Cove clan, as of all my matriarchs, grandmother, great-grandmothers, and I am born for English and French descent. My father was from Oregon and Washington State, and my maternal grandfathers are of the Salt clan, and my paternal lineage is English and French. I'm originally from a community known as Teyatko. It's area where the water flows from the rocks, and also Corrales, New Mexico. I have a daughter who's 21, and she's in the midst of a winter storm right now in Flagstaff, Arizona, where she goes to school. My companion, my husband, is from an area called Kishini, Cedar Springs, Arizona, on the Dene Nation. And my mother is Lucille Stillwell. My late father was William Stillwell. My maternal grandparents are Robert Spencer Sr. and Alice Nota Spencer. So I'm grateful to share a little bit about who I am and my kinship to each of you through our clans and through this connection today. So thank you so much. Let's go ahead and proceed into the next slide. Today, we're going to all walk on a journey together. The objectives are to describe Indigenous-based knowledge about planting food, share stories promoting the cultural value of corn, beans, and squash, and generate discussion of the cultural strengths of land-based learning. So today, we are in the midst of the winter season. We are preparing now for the spring season. So we call this winter season Chay, and we are preparing for Da. And that's my daughter's middle name. So we are preparing for this time of life where we are preparing for our planting time. So this spring season is very, very special, as each of you know who have grown food or are being nourished by the land. But this month is also our calendar month of Atsapiyaj, which means the month that the eaglets hatch. So this is a very special day being together with you. So thank you. Let's continue walking on this journey together today. Next slide. Before we go any further, I'd like for us to really think about the place in which we are today. Each of you and your footsteps are upon Nahasan Yama, Mother Earth. So this link down below, when you have time, please look at the area in which you are living or working, but more importantly, to share with elders that you'll be working with and community members about where they live and work. Especially in areas that have become more colonized and urbanized, it's important that those communities, especially who are non-Indigenous, realize and know what Indigenous lands and ancestral lands they are currently residing on or working on. So here in Albuquerque, I am sharing with you this beautiful homeland upon which I live and work. But this is the original ancestral homeland that I wish to honor today. We are honoring the traditional lands of Isleta Pueblo, Sandia Pueblo, Santa Ana Pueblo, Zia Pueblo, Jemez Pueblo, Diné, and Indigenous communities who speak the languages of the Tiwa, Keres, Tewa, Towa, Zuni, Apache, and Diné sacred home place. So please continue with your incredible work by honoring ancestral territories, whether it's in your email salutation or in presentations or in community conversations that you have. Thank you. We may proceed to the next slide. So as we begin, I'd like to have us start with a group activity in the chat box. Please write down a place that is special to you. Oftentimes, we don't know where we might have taken our first footsteps upon Mother Earth. That was the first day we began to walk as an infant. But we might have been told that story. I remember when my daughter took her first steps was on her first birthday on March 26, 2001. But she may not remember it, but it's through the stories that she knows when she first took her first footsteps on Mother Earth. So today, share with each other and me about your favorite places to be in this world, to walk, to plant on Nahasan if you do plant foods upon Mother Earth. So in the chat box, I'll give you a few moments to write down your favorite place to be. It could be your home. It could be a favorite hiking trail. It could be a place to run, or it could be other areas. So please write those down, and it'd be wonderful if we could bring up the chat box so we can read them together, and we'll view them in a way that we can share those. So I'm seeing the beach, Alaska, Little Coon Mountain, the cliffs in Southern California, in the deep woods, my grandma's farm outside of Kansas, Camden, my home in Minnesota. Wonderful. This is so special to see the mountains in the Pacific area, Sedona, the Arches in Parks, Utah, Red Rocks near my hometown, Cable Lake in the forests of Wisconsin, anywhere in Alaska, my grandma's garden on the street I grew up on, Camden State near Marshall, Minnesota, my parents' garden, in the deep woods in a tree stand while hunting, my grandma's house outside of Kansas. Beautiful. Thank you so much. A hiking trail just outside my city, Glacier National, Paradise Valley, Montana, Hemlock Cliffs in southern Indiana, beautiful woods and beside a lake in my childhood home in Southwest Arkansas, my mother's home, Yellow Rock Point, beautiful. Fish Point, Arizona, so peaceful there. Smith Island, Maryland. Wonderful. So on Abel Tasman Forest in New Zealand, Smith Island, Maryland. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. This is powerful to see the places that we journey and walk. Ask this question when you are with our community members. So what I'm sharing with you can be those beautiful open-ended questions to create dialogue, create beautiful holistic language and communication, but then also stories accompany that. So as you're sharing where your favorite places are to walk or to be, to hunt, to plant, to swim, these all encompass stories, beautiful narratives and lived experiences. So imagine the conversations that you'll have that ignite that fire for that communication to take place between you and the elders that you'll meet with. So thank you all so much. I hope you enjoyed this activity. I also see Boral Forest, Raspberry Tribal Grounds, Red Cliff, Wisconsin, Lake Superior. Thank you, Amber. I also like for you to see this photo. Someone said Las Vegas. I was once told South Paiute land. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Abad. In this photo, I want you to think about this image as we go forward. The hands are so powerful. Someone said Twifflican in Sweetwater. Thank you so much. Your home in Anadarko Yeah, gardening as a small child with your grandparents. Thank you so much, Deborah. So as we go forward, think about this image. How we talk about nourishing foods and on the land and how it nourishes us, these food plants. This is how this person is holding this corn. Corn is also called maíz. It's actually from Mexico and Central America and South America. But the stories are so powerful because some of our traditional people have come from corn, they say. So those are stories from each distinct indigenous community, whether they're Hopi, Zuni, the Pueblo communities of New Mexico or Arizona, or all the way to Haudenosaunee, Iroquois, Mohawk, Seneca, Onondaga nations of New York and in the eastern region. So each one of our native nations has a beautiful story connected to this maíz, this corn, as we say, nada and dene. It's almost as though this person's cradling the corn like a baby. So I want us to think about that, how we are gentle and caring and loving. So these words that are going to emerge, these feelings connected to the food. So food is so much more than nourishment for the body. It's nourishing the mind, body, and heart, but also our cultural lifeways. So please continue. Let's also think about plants as our teachers today and sharing this with the communities that you serve. Sharing with them these words that life lessons come from plants, our food, our nourisher, respecting the growth of the plant life because it's so much more than just the seed to the water, to the soil, to the plant, to the human being. It's so much more than that. There's a very special life cycle, a plant life. The Hopi say that the men plant the corn, but they also sing to the corn as they're walking towards the cornfield, and that corn grows looking out for their father and hearing the song and saying, oh, my father's singing for me, and it grows with that song. So in a way, we are respecting and honoring that growth of the plant life with songs, with words, with positive thinking. There's a sacred partnership in each stage of life. There's a partnership between the corn and babies when they're born. In different tribal nations, either the corn pollen is provided to the baby, or a whole white ear of corn is presented to the sun with the baby, and a special name is given. So different native nations and indigenous communities have different ways in which there's a partnership between the food and us as human beings, or the animals and the insects and the birds. And also in each stage of life, there's different types of foods that are given, especially when one is an infant or a teenager or an adult or an elder. So it's a part of our whole beautiful life cycle as a human being. To honor the foods near us, perhaps it means going to the farmers markets near us. Because sometimes, we need to know the journey of our food, and asking our community members the journey of the food that they eat. They may know and some may not know, and that's okay. But giving them that knowledge helps them to really connect with the food that they're eating. As Dr. Roxanne Swensel talks about, we should know the story of where our food came to us, especially on the plate in front of us. And to know that story and to honor that story of the journey of that food, whether it's protein, the meats, or whether it's the fruits and vegetables, or the grains, the beans, or the rice, the wild rice, the manuman, as the Ojibwe call it, to really know that journey story of our food. That plants take care of us, and that we care for the seeds, plants, and nourishment cycle. So there's a beautiful connection and relationship with our foods and our seeds and the water and the land. Next slide, please. We're going to use this term today that's being used often now when we're talking about traditional foods or food planting or food sovereignty. It's called rematriation. It's the matriarchal connection to who we are as a people and to our land, Mother Earth, and also how we rematriate seeds back to our communities. So rather than saying repatriation, it's the rematriation of many of our stories of the corn maiden, of Astanaglehe changing woman, of white shell woman, Yolgai Asa, are the carriers and caretakers, salt woman, Asa Shihe, are these guardians of our foods and are the ones that brought the foods to us. And so I want us to think about from the earth up today, our knowledge and our storytelling, our sharing is rooted. You each have deep roots, whether it's with their Ponca lifeway or your Paiute lifeway or your Alaskan Native community village lifeway. We all are rooted from the earth, and those roots now travel as a corn plant does. We're going to be talking about the building and planting of this corn as we talk about nourishing foods. So think about the roots of the corn plant, the feet, the body, the heart, the mind, just as you have all of this. And today what we're going to be doing is talking about this pollination of information. So this beautiful image of this Dene woman is sprinkling the tassels from the top of the corn plant into the basket to collect tchadidin, which is yellow corn pollen. Very, very special, very sacred to many of the Southwest communities here in New Mexico and Arizona, but also in Apache lifeways, they use the corn pollen plant of cattails and many other plants that are used to collect pollen. So we're pollinating our thoughts today. We're pollinating our words and our thinking today. So that's what you do with your work as you care for elders in the community. Next slide, please. We're also thinking together and talking together. So this word, if everyone could repeat after me, wherever you're sitting today, say Nsaha case. Nsaha case. Do and Hizad. Do and Hizad. Nsaha case, do and Hizad, meaning our thinking and our language or our communication. Our thinking and our speech will be as one. Collective thought process and communication, and holistic language. Here's an image of a Dene basket with the 4 sacred colors of the corn, but then also this basket comes from our foods, comes from the plants that we use for dyeing wool to make rugs, but also to make baskets, but also to eat. So there's this beautiful cycle of life from these plants that help in all aspects of our lifeways. Next slide, please. Communicating about gardening, you're going to hear many different terms from local USDA programs to local Indigenous food cultivators, to elders, to community people that work in this area. And it's very important to hear these words today because sometimes we hear them and aren't quite sure what they mean or how they connect to what we do. And saying these instills positive thinking for our community members. So regaining health, whole being wellness, resilient traditional foods, nourishing native foods, nutrient-rich foods, regenerative food cultivation, indigenous food sovereignty. We're thinking about gardening, which entails so much more than this list I prepared for you just now. It's the nutrient-rich soil. It's the tools, whether they're traditional or modern tools. It's the seeds, whether they're ancestral seeds or modern seeds, water. And the access to water is really critical around the world right now, but especially in our communities. Talking about water itself is such a special conversation. Tu'asan, water woman, we call her, is a powerful dialogue to have with our community members, especially them drinking enough water, because majority of who we are and our being is made of water, and especially talking about the waters of the world. In New Zealand, now they have created a law that protects the rights of the rivers and the waterways and the mountains, that they each have rights. They're living beings with rights. So it's really important that we talk about the sustenance and nourishment from water as well. having positive intention for the seed as we plant it. Even some communities say to have a positive intention to ask permission from the ants and the insects and the animals if we can plant on the land that they live. Because guess what? They will be also enjoying the foods that you plant. Pollinators, the butterflies, the bees, the hummingbirds, all of these pollinators, the ants, they're so important and so needed, so critical. Hoeing weeds, one of my favorite things to do. My father would always say, yes, you can have a good life, but make sure you're always taking care of the weeds around you, right? Weeding, really important. Protecting our crops, whether it's shielding them when there's a frost or, protecting them in healthy ways from pests, not pesticides, but healthy ways to protect from pests. And then the harvesting. So I have an image here of container gardening, which might be more suitable for someone that lives in an apartment or has a very small yard, or they don't have nutrient-rich soil. So they can do container gardening. And so there's tomatoes here, squash, and other plants, and those flourish. I've grown tomatoes in big pots before, and they do very well, and they're delicious. Up above, you see a Diné farmer farming on dry land. So there's dry land farming in Zuni and Hopi and many of our communities in Talani Lake and Loop in Arizona. So there's incredible dry land farming techniques as well. So let's continue on. So here is one of many models that you might see and use if you wish to share with your community members. This is called the Traditional Food Principles. This comes out of Northwest Indian College, and you can view it online. But I just love this because it's very culturally centered. So there's models like this that are culturally centered in each region where you may work. So say if you work in the Northwest Coast region, this would be pertinent. If you work in the Southwest Coast region, you could use it as a reference source, but to use something that's with the Pueblo communities perhaps, or Diné or Zuni or Hopi communities would be more relevant. If we were to go into a Lakota community, say South Dakota, North Dakota regions, you would want to use something that is pertinent to Lakota, Dakota, Nakota ways. So here we have the traditional foods are whole foods. Eat with the seasons, eat a variety of foods, eat local foods. Wild and organic foods are better for health. Honor the food web, cook and eat with good intention, promote generosity, cultivate food sovereignty. And it's also honoring the seasons. So a lot of us may not know long ago that we actually ate with the seasons. So a lot of the winter season foods were the dried foods. So it'd be dried squash, dried corn, and then it would be boiled with jerky meat or fresh meat. And then it would be remade into a beautiful stew, or you add water to it and it just plumps up the corn and the food and the beans and the squash to just incredible meals and dishes. So this is very important. And especially like when I went out to Portland, it was powerful to learn that only the Native nations could fish salmon out of the Columbia River. Non-natives did not have a right to do so. So knowing even laws about the foods that are pertinent to that community and who's protected and who has hunting rights and fishing rights and so forth are very important to integrate with this knowledge. So if we're talking about gardening, we also want to talk about the foundation of that community model of foods, their rights, and also access to some of these traditional seeds or foods as well. So let's continue on. I'd like to now share a Diné story of Turkey and gifting us our seeds. This is a beautiful sand painting through a publication known as Southern Navajo News. And it's a beautiful depiction of our 4 traditional corn plants, na da, na yize, na otle, na to. And oftentimes we hear of the 3 sisters, but Arnold Clifford would like to share, he's a traditional ethnobotanist, that's Diné, talks about the 4 sisters. And the nut'o is a healing plant in addition to the corn, squash, and beans. So this turkey story is ancestral, and it comes from our different worlds in which we've emerged from. So from the third world to the fourth world, there was a time where the animals and the insects and living beings were all communicating with humans and the holy people. And this is a traditional story that can be told in the winter season. So that's why I'm relaying it at this time. And there's many different variations of the story, but it is Taji, they call her Taji, a turkey woman that saved our seeds, that traveled from the third world to the fourth world through a great flood. And when she reached into the fourth world, she was able to be pushed up through this great flood. And that's why you see the white tipped tail feathers of a turkey from the great flood waters. And they say that she volunteered. There was many people and beings that were asked, who can take care of our seeds? Who can protect them and take them up to the world where the five-fingered ones, the humans and all of us can be nurtured with these foods? Who is brave enough? And they say that Traji Issa said, I will be the one. So she carried these seeds in all different areas of her winged body. And when she went up into the fourth world, she shook her body, and all these different fruit berries and nut'o and corn and squash and bean seeds came from different parts of her being. So it's just a beautiful story. And I think to share a story that's relevant to your community where you're working, meet with elders that know these traditional stories for seeds and share them with the community, because then we have kinship with the land, kinship with the food. We have an honoring of these ancient stories, ancestral healing stories that can help us as we plant the foods. So we may continue. And also I want us to think about this term, TEK, traditional ecological knowledge. It's place-based through Indigenous homelands. So finding out TEK of your community will help you as you talk about gardening with the community and bringing in these resources for gardening. So on the right side, you see this black, blue, yellow, and star-like image. That's a Dene worldview of our cosmology, of our way of life. And how we plant our TEK comes from the stars, and so when we see the stars in a certain alignment, then it's either in late April or early May is when we begin planting. Then we see the star formation in the summer. When we see a certain star formation again in the fall, that's when we harvest. So our planting is actually dictated through our traditional star stories, which is just beautiful to connect with. So you see again in this image with our traditional home, our hogan in the center with the 4 sacred plants. Then you see our star beings. They each have their own star stories and sacred mountains. And then the ways in which we have emerged to this fourth world where Turkey woman brought our seeds. And that's the seeds that you see there. In a conceptualization of Yurok traditional ecological knowledge, you see this model of the Yurok people and their teachings and their stories, their physical management, their wildlife, their take of wildlife with cultural protocols, their regalia, their food or tools, their spiritual management. This is their way of life. And so thinking about where you're from, if you're in an urban area like Albuquerque, we try not to be very centric in one way. We are universal with all Indigenous lifeways. So with NACA, we have many different tribal nations represented there. At the University of New Mexico, we have many Native nations represented there. And in Albuquerque alone, we have multiple Native nations that live here. So we want to be very universal in different teachings and have people from those communities. So say if I wanted to have someone learn about Zuni cultural gardening specifically, I would ask someone that's Zuni, like Reina Bantia, who has Tsuya farms here in Albuquerque. I would ask her so she could relay this knowledge if she wishes, or her planting process, however she wishes. Okay. Continue on, please. So I'd like for us to think about this centers me as a person, as a Dene woman, but also as an Indigenous human being of our Dene philosophy of learning. So this creates my focus on how to talk about foods and our way of life. This is an ancient philosophy, but now this has been created at our tribal colleges, Diné College, Navajo Technical University, and also our healthcare centers. Indian Health Services, our 638 health centers use this wellness model and philosophy for health and well-being. So we begin to the east where the sun rises, in Sahakes Ha'a, to the south, planning Nahat'a, Shada'a, and then to the west, where the sun sets, is Ina, life action, E'a, and then to the north is knowledge and reflection, is Nahokos and Sihasin. So we're infants as we rise in the morning, we're teenagers during the day, we're adults maturing throughout the day, and then we're elders resting with our knowledge at night. So this is a daily life cycle, and you see our traditional basket at the back, and then also our sacred mountains and our corn plant with the bluebird at the top. All of these have symbolisms that and when I do share with Diné community members, I talk about this, especially our youth, to then say, this is our framework for food, for gardening as well, not just for tribal college or hospitals, right? Okay, you may proceed. So here's a calendar. All of our Indigenous calendars are based on food systems and the different types of seasons. So our New Year's starts in October. It doesn't start in January. We don't abide by the Gregorian calendar. In a modern way, we do. But if we were to look at several different types of calendars of Indigenous communities, they are based on the big wind, small wind, the planting season, the way of life of an eagle, right? So if we were to look at different calendars in your communities, start researching and gathering them to show what that month is and may represent the time of harvesting choke cherries or other types of berries, and connecting to that in an Indigenous way. So it's indigenizing your calendars for gardening in your community. So we are now in the month of Atsapiyaj, birth of eaglets. Next slide, please. Here is an example of Lakota calendar. If you see this now, you see all the different variations of their months in accordance to their sacred foods in the center of the circle, their sacred animals and beings. But then you also see in May, it's the moon of planting, and it's the Lakota word for that. And you'll see different variations of seasons and types of winter names, the month of the strong cold. In Lakota way, they also say you are sharing about your age with the number of winters you have lived through, rather than saying I'm 12 years old, I have lived 12 winters, is what they would say. So much of who we are as Indigenous peoples based on the way of life of the land, the seasons, the air, the water, and planting. Next slide, please. In accordance with the Lakota calendar, I wanted to share this with you, and you're welcome to see this when you have time, but it's the Lakota Being Good Relatives Food Sovereignty Conference, and Lula Red Cloud is such a beautiful person who shared stories about their traditional foods, about wild asparagus, and talked in Lakota and in English. So if you wanted to share these stories with the community, you could put it up on your, maybe you have an iPad or your phone to share, or even share it as links to the community members so they can learn these stories. I think this really helps provide hope and inspiration, but also knowledge. And they are sharing healing words as well as they share these stories. So it's very special and very empowering when these individuals are sharing, and we are gifted with their knowledge. And so this is just one of those resources that you can use. Next slide, please. So reflection, as we go forward from here, I want you to focus on the gifts from nature, kinship with food and plants, honoring the value of food for our heart, mind, and body. Think of a plant that has nourished you and your family. Take a moment now to think about the cedar, juniper, and pine trees and gifts that they give to us in all life. So I just want you to think about that as we go forward, okay? Let's continue on, please. So honoring the gifts from nature. Here is the cedar tree. They're abundant in many different communities. I was shocked by how tall they are in the Northwest coast. They're so beautiful. I just wanted to just walk amongst them all day, but was so touched by how they're revered and honored through making of clothing and hats, but also how they harvest the cedar tree bark in Washington and Oregon. This is a picture of a cedar tree where I'm from, and this is all the gifts that they give us. They give us cedar tea. They give us a home. We can build a home. This is a photo of a traditional male hogan. And then in the center, you see the berries that grow on juniper trees. And these are taken apart in the center, and they're made into bracelets or necklaces for protection. So all of these are beautiful gifts from nature. Next slide, please. We taste the land. So from pine trees, piñon trees, we have the delicious piñon nuts. And there are many stories about the piñon nuts that you can find on the internet, whether they're from California to Arizona to New Mexico. But now chefs all over the world are preparing foods with the harvested piñon nuts. I see them now being sold in Costco. One bag about this size is about $32. And so Nota Begay the Third Foundation has a wonderful recipe that highlights piñons, and it supports heart health and low blood sugar. So it's very good for people who have diabetes or who are pre-diabetic. But it also has traditional stories from each of these different Native nations that have always used them ancestrally and historically. So these piñon nuts are flavorful, they're wonderful, but they also are part of the land. So sharing about this to contextualize it for our community is very important. To even go harvesting the piñon nuts with the community would be very special as well. Please continue. And then we look at other gifts from these trees. So from pine trees, we have pine sap. My great grandmother used to put little buckets up against a tree, and she would allow for the sap to come into the buckets. Whenever we had a cold or an infection or a cut, she would immediately use her tree sap, Simbijay. And on our, when we had a cold, she would place it all over like Vicks on our chest. She would put the pine sap, and then she would put a hot washcloth, and it would just let us rest. It would let us be nurtured by the scent, the aroma. But I would say it was very supportive of our healing process, because I would feel better very soon. So it was a wonderful connection to this medicine, this tree sap. So it's a self-aid, it's a wound and skin rash treatment, antiseptic, anti-inflammatory, and antibacterial. It's used for burns, glue and epoxy. It's a pine pitch, waterproofs our baskets, as you can see in this image, patches holes in tents and tarps, and it's a makeshift candle as well. Next slide, please. This is known as Chilahue green thread. It's called Kota as well. And this is used in all of our Southwest communities. It even grows here in Albuquerque at the base of the Sandia Mountains. It's a wonderful, wonderful plant. It's good for if you have a tummy ache, but it's also good for just nurturing yourself. You see this now, I think, attempting to be grown and cultivated through seed in different farms, but this is a wild plant. And so I think talking about the wild plants that grow in your communities for your community members is really important, and even doing a nature walk. I'm sure there's someone in your community with USDA or a university county extension or different programs through different places that can have access to these. So you can have like Linda Black Elk. She does nature walks, even in parks where there's edible fruits and plants. Okay, next slide, please. I also want to share about the sweetgrass. This is a very special plant to many of our Indigenous nations, as far as up into First Nations reserves in Canada and here in America in the lower traditional Native homelands. In the US, we have culture, community, reconnection, strength, braiding the sweetgrass. There's a role in Aboriginal culture where sweetgrass is usually braided. 3 sections represent the mind, body, and soul, love, kindness, and honesty. The 3 sections of the braid have 7 strands of grass per section of braid. They say the sweetgrass is the hair of our mother, the earth. Each strand alone is not as strong as when braided together. Sweetgrass represents the northern direction of the medicine wheel. All life is sacred. Enjoy life. So talking about this, the braiding of it, even harvesting it, if this grows in your communities, they grow up to 6 feet high in many communities. And I believe in Canada and Minnesota and Wyoming, I believe, Montana. So it's very important that we talk about the representation of them in addition to using them. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share a journey of one of our food plants. This is called chichen, and this is the sumac berry. This sumac berry actually is a delicacy in many dishes around the world, even in Middle Eastern dishes, but it's a very special plant in our traditional lifeways in New Mexico and Arizona and Utah and Colorado. This is how it looks at the top. You see the little berries that are dried. The leaves look like this. This is when they're dried, but they are beautiful green. And they are often harvested up in Utah. But this is Mary Holiday Black. She is actually looking at ki. Ki is the main plant of the sumac berry bush. And that's what they harvest to then make these baskets. So then they split them into 3s. And then they create their basket. So you can see her beautiful, loving hands creating the center of the basket. And then the beginning of the design. This design represents the mountains, the dark clouds, the rainbow. It represents so much of who we are as people. And each basket story is powerful to learn from your communities. Have your community elders teach you those basket stories. Every one of them has roots, and where the food plants are harvested, how they're even used as foods are very important. So the berries that you see here are actually made into this pudding on the next slide. So this is known as chichen. This is from the Navajo Nation Special Diabetes Program cooking demonstration. So it is finely ground, and then you mix it in. Everyone has a different recipe, but it's really bitter. So you have to sweeten it. Some people sweeten it with sugar, some people sweeten it with honey, but traditionally it was not sweetened too much. But often what I've enjoyed is mixing it with blue corn mush, and it's so delicious. And I just love the scent. It takes you back into the land when you smell this berry and when you smell the pudding being made. And that's what food should do. Food should reconnect us to the land. Oftentimes we think of a food and we think of a restaurant, right? But in an Indigenous frame of mind, it should really take us back to that river or to that mountain or to that desert place where that food came from. Next slide, please. We also have food representation as clans. So if we're talking about gardening, it's also connecting to us as a human being. We have many different clans in our Dene way of life, over 80 clans or more, but these are just a few that are connected to some of the foods. Nadan Dene, Corn People Clan, Ashihe, Salt Clan, that's my maternal grandfather's clan. Nayiza Dene, Squash People Clan, Hashkan Hadzoa, Yucca Fruit Clan. So ask in some of the communities, I know in some of our Pueblo communities, some of them may be connected to foods as well, but also to birds. Some may be Roadrunner Clan or societies connected to different types of foods, fruits as well, and vegetables. So it's really important that we start learning and helping our community members. Some of them may not know their clans, and that's not their fault. And really, when we look at the language of motivational interviewing, it's important to learn from our community members, not judge them if they don't know some of these stories, because many of us have been forced into acculturation, school systems that didn't honor these stories or Indigenous lifeways. So for some community members, this is a brand new learning process for them. So as much as we can share this knowledge, it amplifies what they may already know or what they're learning. So next slide, please. I love this quote from an incredible chef. I hope to go to his cafe someday. It's in White Mountain Apache. It's called Cafe Goujon. He's White Mountain Apache and Dene, and he says, clans are made after places where medicine and food plant relatives grow, or where they choose to live. My son, my brothers, and our boys are sons of sacred mountains, as are all other White Mountain Apaches and Navajo. We are sons of sacred mountains. So he created a restaurant in a treatment center. He often talks about his own sobriety journey and how learning how to cook, he learned about French cuisine and all these European and American techniques. But what he said has especially grounded him today, and what led him to creating his own restaurant for the Apache people and Indigenous people, but for all people. But really, it's to heal his community and to really regain that ancestral strength through food, is learning about how to cook traditional foods again. So I just love this. So next slide, please. Here's a garden where we have begun here in the International District. It's the First Nations garden. I help take care of the garden. You'll see on the far left that it's a sweet little small area. This is like a 30-foot shade area that was built. And then we have raised gardens and dry and a drip irrigation system that was put in for us. But there are 4 rows of corn there, Hopi blue corn. And they say it's best to plant 4 rows rather than just 2 or 1 row, because the 4 rows helps them to cross-pollinate, and then it helps them to grow better and stronger. And then we have all these different seeds that were planted and starter plants that were planted by our young people in the community and sheltered relatives that walk through the community. They help plant this food with me. So this is green chili. This turned out to be about this long, and it was delicious. And then on the far right, you see the beginning of a blue corn growing with the tassels from it. So it's just a beautiful place to be. And I always invite community members. If you're ever in Albuquerque, would love to show it to you. You're welcome to come visit us here. But also what's important is that our community knows about other gardens. So my dream is to have a garden tour where I drive community members in a 15-passenger van and take them to all the gardens, maybe 2 or 3 different days, to visit different gardens and the stories of those food growers, the stories of the plants, the seeds, and also knowing that they're growing where over 300 Pueblo farmland gardens grew in Albuquerque. So that's really important to have that regenerative story be told, and for that wisdom to keep growing of the gardens. Next slide, please. So here is an image of the 3 sisters and the ways in which they have this beautiful synergy in which they grow. They say to plant the corn first and then the beans a few weeks later, and then the squash. And so they all have helped each other. So every Native nation has a connection to different ways that these plants either grow together or near each other or far away from each other. So everyone has a different way interpretation of how to plant these seeds. But as you're talking about the 3 sisters, also thinking on what Arnold Clifford said, that he also calls it the 4 sisters. So that's in addition to what we hear from different Native communities. So we also have the nutrients of the pinto beans. So if you're going to talk about gardening and maybe the community member wants to garden 3 plants, maybe a salsa garden, right? Jalapeno, cilantro, and tomatoes. So bring together these images that show the benefits and nutrients of a tomato plant, cilantro, and jalapeno. And each of those will be a part of their garden toolkit, so to speak. Then you can even share recipes. Here's a recipe of the 3 sisters being cooked together as well. Next slide, please. And here are some links for you to look at of the 3 sisters. And there's many links and articles on the internet, but choose what's appropriate for your community and the life ways of the elders or people that you'll be working with. Next slide, please. And then I also wanted to touch on these beautiful pollinators. There are teachers, there are protectors. They are the ones that guide us, and without them, we would not have the flowers and the blossoming of our food plants, our vegetable plants, or any of our other plants that help us in life. So we have many more than what's the images that you see here. This is a drawing of Hopi Lifeway, and they have beautiful stories about the hummingbird as being pollinators for their way of life, and also very much like Taji Asa, Turkey woman, bringing together this way of life for gardening. So next slide, please. Love this quote. This is a book, so try collecting books or going to the library. Children's books also have incredible narration of these stories. So you might not often find them in other sections of the library, but going to the children's part of the library, you'll find these. These also might be available on the internet, but this particular one is beautiful because it's written by Hopi authors. So try to find books that are written by the Indigenous communities. This person says, we see corn as the gift of the spirit being that rules the world as a caretaker of corn. He gave us corn to be our soul. Hopi corn survives because our religion is still strong and our values are important to us. So this shows our community members how important these elements are to us by sharing these stories. Next slide, please. Indigenous food sovereignty and the re-indigenization of the diet. Dana Thompson stated, Indigenous food access and education can help us to reclaim the health of Indigenous foods, which is really important. And it's not just physical health, it's spiritual health and cultural health. So I talked to a dear brother of mine who shared that the interpretation of this word in Lakota means the traditional carrots, I believe. And this is in a garden. And as you see, all the names of their food plants are in their traditional words, which is beautiful. That could be something special for the community member to grow gardens and then label them not only in English, but in their traditional words. Next slide, please. Here I'd like to share about this amazing plant. And it comes from the stories of Stephen Small Salmon and Joanne Big Crane from the Salish Kootenai homeland in Montana. And it talks about the time of great hunger, as many of us talk about in our origin stories, time of great struggle and famine, especially after colonization and genocide, manifest destiny. We encountered great hunger and destitute conditions. But in this story, Joanne Big Crane talks about a grandmother who cried, asking for help from the Creator to feed her people. And where she cried grew this beautiful plant that you see here. And when you harvest it, it's only the women that the leaders of the community, the women say, the matriarchs say, it is time to harvest. And they know which plants to go to and harvest. So the whole community gathers and they go and to gather this beautiful plant. They eat with the plant. They honor the plant. It sits beside them as they eat the plant, and they are nurtured by it. And they say they get strong health and it's good for their heart. So this is a powerful plant. I believe it's called speculum, and it is a very beautiful healing plant. And there are stories after story connected to these teachings. And you'll find that story in the Story of the Bitter Root Part 1 on the internet. Next slide, please.
So, Doctor, we're really getting to the end.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay.
Yeah, we're just about at the end of our time.
Sure.
And so I just we've just got a minute or so left. And I wanted a chance for you to wrap up and to
Sure.
and for us to express our gratitude of this wonderful presentation that you have made today. So and as I have said and has been said, we will be posting your slide, the recording on cms.gov in the near future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna. Well, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. My email is at the last slide, shanoaba@gmail.com. And also, you're welcome to email and just connect and visit. Thank you, Amber Miigwech. Thank you to each and every one of you. I wish you a beautiful day in this winter season. And I really honor all of your work in helping our people. Thank you all so much.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Noah. I loved your voice, the tone of it, how much how much information you shared, and I hope we get connected in the future. So with that, I am going to just once again remind people it'll be online at cms.gov. And we thank you so much for joining our session today. Thank you, everybody.